He says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Clearly, I think you can see that this is at the heart of Jesus' teaching. He wants his disciples to know this. And even as you hear these words, maybe some of you are, okay, what is it he's saying here? What is it that, I need to do or strive for? There may be these thoughts that are going through your mind, and certainly the disciples were trying to figure this out as well. But do all of you get the sense that of all the things Jesus teaches, this is right at the heart of what he wants his disciples to know? Do you see that? I think there are, at least as we continue to read about the sufferings of Christ, there are at least two incidences that happen along the way of Jesus going to the cross. They give us a lot of insight into what it is that Jesus is teaching here. And I want to look at some of those with you. The first one, what I'd like to have you do, you'll just turn back a couple pages in your Bible to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26. And I want to talk about this issue of position, authority, status, our ideal of becoming someone, what life is all about. And we're going to look in chapter 26. I want to begin reading in verse 47. Now, Jesus had gathered around him a group of 12 disciples. These were people, like I said, who traveled with him. They ate with him. They slept where he slept. They were with each other constantly. They wanted to learn from him. They thought he was a great man. They'd seen these astonishing, amazing miracles. They listened to his teaching. They saw that he taught like someone they'd never heard before. They saw the crowds that flocked to him. And they were his disciples. They were with him. And at any rate, at some point, one of those disciples, Judas, decides that this is not going the way he thought it was going to go. And he decides, for the price of 30 silver pieces, that he will betray Jesus into the hands of those who seek to arrest him. And we'll just kind of pick up here in verse 47 of chapter 26. While Jesus was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. So there's an army that shows up. They're armed. They're there to arrest Jesus. Judas, who is now leading them, is going to point out to them who it is that they need to arrest. Verse 48 says, "Now the betrayer, Judas, had arranged for a signal with them. 'The one I kiss is the man, arrest him.' So going at once to Jesus, Judas said, 'Greetings, Rabbi,' and kissed him. And Jesus replied, 'Friend, do what you came for.'" Now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the disciple. Just imagine that you're one of the other 11 who are with Jesus. You've been with him. You've been astonished by him. You see in him something so amazing that you will give your entire life to this. And now one of your friends has gone off on the side and has arranged for him to be arrested. They've come forward, a mob, an army with clubs, with swords. Judas has come forward, has identified Jesus, and they now arrest him. What's going through your mind? What are you thinking? I don't know for sure, but I imagine they're scared. They're frightened. There's this anxiety, like, what do we do? In this moment when he's being arrested, shall we fight? Shall we strike back? In the middle of verse 50 it says, "Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. And with that, one of Jesus' companions," we later in the other Gospels realize that this is Peter, "reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear." So here are these people, they're coming, there's a mob of people, they're armed, they're coming to get Jesus, and Peter, I suppose, in the frame of mind that any of us would be in, does what would be our first impulse as well. He reaches for the sword and strikes back. And I think it would be our first impulse. I mean, okay, so someone slaps you across the face, what's your first impulse? someone says a biting remark to you, your first impulse, say something back. You know that someone is going around stabbing you in the back. What do you want to do? Someone's making themselves look better than you. So now how do you want to respond? You want to respond by making yourself look better too, right? I think it's a reasonable impulse on Peter's part. I mean, it's so easy for us to take out our sword in a show of what we think is strength, right? I don't want to appear weak. When someone hits me, I want to hit back. When someone says something to me, I don't want to just roll over. I'm going to say something to them, right? Okay. So Peter, I think, he responds with his first impulse. He thinks he's acting in strength. I think Jesus sees it a different way. In fact, he says, "Put your sword back in its place. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword." Now, there's a mob of people who are armed with clubs and swords. And as Jesus looks around, basically, any of these can at the same time, now that Peter struck, immediately strike back, right? That's the situation. Those who draw by the sword, when you strike, it can certainly come right back to you. Jesus then says this. I find this fascinating. So Peter, I think in his mind, he's acting with a show of strength. I think Jesus sees it as weakness. He says in verse 53, "Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" Now get this. I think if you're looking at Jesus in this moment, at least on the surface, he appears weak, right? He's been arrested. He's been overcome. Peter, I think he fashions himself as being full of strength. I think Jesus sees it as weakness. Jesus, who appears weak, he points out that he's actually, strong. Don't you realize that at any moment I could just call down 12 legions of angels? I mean, the one who actually is strong appears weak. The one who appears strong is weak. You see that? This way it gets inverted? There's another interesting passage. I won't have you turn there. I'll just put it up here on the screen. There's this interchange between Pontius Pilate and Jesus. Once Jesus is arrested, Pontius Pilate is the governing official who's given charge to try Jesus. At one point in their conversation, he becomes frustrated because he's asking Jesus questions, and Jesus is remaining silent. And he basically says, "Aren't you going to speak? Aren't you going to say anything in your defense?" And then he asks this question in John chapter 19. "Don't you realize, Jesus, that I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Don't you realize what my position is? Don't you realize that I am the person of power here? I am the one who can either free you or I am the one who can crucify you. I mean, don't you see that, Jesus? And I think if you read this passage, to me it's fascinating. Jesus, it's like he's got this spiritual kung fu.